welcome to the section of the course in regards to mass media. This is one of my favorite subjects, and I will try really hard not to infer some of my opinions onto you, but I think it's really intriguing, and it's constantly evolving and changing, and everybody has an opinion about mass media. So let's dig in, and you can start formulating your own opinions and maybe quite possibly changing some of your opinions. The first thing I'd like to discuss is that we are all mass media consumers. That could be voluntarily, involuntarily, and either way, we must consume media critically. And we're going to talk a little bit about what it means to consume media critically. There are two ways to think of mass media. At least that's the way I think of them. First is mass media as a revenue-generating business. And this is what we have typically learned of mass media in the past, and this is still a bulk of the media in which we consume. And this is, again, the revenue-generating business. And revenue-generating means that it's profit-making. They are in the business to make a profit. And sources of revenue for the profit could be consumer purchases and advertising. Consumer purchases include movie tickets, cable or satellite services, e-books, etc. And then, of course, advertising revenue that comes from consumers watching the media. So categories that fit into this umbrella are book and printing press, newspapers, television, and of course this is general network and cable, radio services, including nonprofit or community radio, and internet sites. And so as we move through this content, I just want to make sure you are constantly thinking to yourself, in your own mind, which one do you think is most credible? Think of what is regulated and what is not regulated. Out of all of these listed here, the one source that has the least regulation is internet. So many of you may think that Wikipedia is a credible source of information, and I'm sorry, but it's just not. It's not a necessarily factual based on research, because Wikipedia is a site that anybody can have influence over and change the content of Wikipedia. So let's just think about what the credibility of each of these sources are, and what you get the information is fact or inference. The second category is social media, which is user-generated content. You, I, and everyone are generating content for social media outlets. This is blogs, and blogs are part of profit-making businesses too. For example, most reporters have their own blog off a website. All of our newspapers here in the state of Idaho have blogs with their reporters. Facebook, Twitter, MySpace, Foursquare, and there are several others. And once again, based on all of these options, what is the credibility of each one? When you consume media or information from these sites, what do you think is most credible? Probably my hunch is that you find what your peers and friends and family say on Facebook or Twitter to be most credible than what a stranger posts on their own blog. But think about it. What do you think is the most credible out of all of these sources? Moving forward, let's talk about how we can think critically when it comes to mass media. The first is awareness, just general awareness about how media affects our lives and what those influences actually are. Then think about access, understanding the various forms of media in which you consume every day, and these are growing exponentially. You have your phone, television, internet, billboards, magazines, newspapers. There is a constant stream of mass media products that we come in contact with every day. So analysis, this is to recognize how media works, which is part of what we're doing today, is realizing how media works, and then understand the patternings that mass media undertakes to communicate its messages. Then assessment, thinking critically about these messages and what they're trying to convey, and then action, just being active in media consumption and possibly changing your behaviors about how you consume media on a day-to-day basis. The next thing I want to cover with you is something called the elaboration likelihood model. So bear with me as I try to explain this as best as I can without seeing your eyes glaze over in the classroom or head starting to bob. But elaboration likelihood model is important for you to understand in your analysis of future mass communication. And it's good also for a persuasive element. It covers two persuasive techniques. The first is central and the second is peripheral. So in central, the receiver is an active participant in the process of persuasion. And that means when there is a mass media communication, such as an advertisement, that the communication is very apparent that they're trying to persuade you to buy a product. And I think one of the products that come to mind for me is that product called Head On, and it's supposed to be like a topical cream that you put on your head to relieve headaches. That commercial is very apparent in trying to sell something. This is different in peripheral, where the receiver agrees with the message based on the expert source or attractiveness within the communication. The best example of these are beer or liquor commercials, specifically beer. So, beer commercials show very attractive people on a ski mountain having a great time, or in front of a beach at a bonfire having a great time, or at a party at a friend's house having a great time. The people are attractive, they might not have a ton of clothing on, and it looks like a really great time. So, as consumers, we consume that message, like the attractiveness of the people, want to envision ourselves also in that scene, and so we think, wow, maybe if I buy that beer, I will feel the joy and jubilation of that crowd. So that is an example of a peripheral persuasive technique. Both are influencers in the way it changes behavior. So as you go through your consumption of mass media, you can think about if it is a peripheral message or central. I think one of the biggest advertisers that I know of that causes me a little bit of brain damage is Abercrombie & Fitch, because it is a clothing company, and if you will look at any of their advertisements, half the time there are no clothes on the people in the ads. This is totally a peripheral advertising mechanism. How can you advertise for a clothing company when the models don't wear any clothes? Mind-boggling. I also wanted to cover the nationalist appeal. This is an interesting concept because companies, like you see pictured, are using our own thoughts of patriotism and pride of what it means to be associated as an American, as a member of the United States or citizen of the United States, because our flag colors, our patriotic emotions are driven by the colors of red, white, and blue. So these companies use in their brand or their mark or in their graphic design elements red, white, and blue, and symbols related to the flag. You see striping, you see stars. And so once again, this is going back to our own feelings of being good patriotic members of the United States, and quite possibly these organizations that use symbols of red, white, and blue and stripes and stars want us to transcend that feeling of pride, emotional pride, to these companies and consume their products or services in which they're offering. This next slide I want to spend some time on, and if you have a chance to even pause this PowerPoint presentation and make sure you read it in full, I think it is the nuts and bolts of what it takes to be a media consumer, and a critical consumer at that. It's the 5 questions to ask when you're looking at mass media and the type of persuasive elements in which it's trying to give. Or even, this is a network television show also. So think about the authorship. All messages are constructed. All messages have a gatekeeper. All messages are filtered and have very specific purposes. So the question is, who created this message? Who is the owner of the message? The format. Media messages are constructed using a creative language with its own rules. And those creative techniques are used to grab attention, to garner attention, to hold attention. And that means a lot of adjectives, that means a lot of exciting visuals, and our minds play tricks on us. And so there's a lot of people who have spent a lot of money and time and effort and research to find out what kinds of words and visuals to help garner attention, what they are. The audience, with every message, the author is formatting a message for specific audiences. And different people experience the same message differently. So if you're consuming a message, think about how other different people might understand the same message different from you. So if you take 2 minutes of television ads and place them in Guam, how would they be consumed? Or a magazine in Zimbabwe, how might those messages be consumed differently based on the audience changing? Content, media have embedded values and points of view, and then, so what kind of lifestyles, values, and points of view are represented in or omitted from the message? How is the content constructed? And why is some content obviously left out? Purpose. Most media are organized to gain profit or power. We've talked about that. So you want to really understand, why is the message even being sent? Is it to sell something? Is it to influence? Is it to change behavior? So why is the message being sent? These are the 5 basic questions to ask in regards to having your own personal media literacy. Moving on to the next slide, we're going to change topics just a little bit, but just talk about the speed of media and how it's drastically been changing over the last probably 10 to 15 years. And one of our videos talks about media and really about the mix of mass media coming from revenue-based organizations like NBC News and the rise of user-generated media or consumer media and personal bloggers. Well, the speed of media has changed drastically, and what has happened is that there are more mistakes in the content in which we're reviewing or consuming. And it is because, going to number 3, that the journalists, traditional trained journalists and news sources are trying to keep up with audience attention span. And being forced to report on something is nearly impossible these days based on consumer-generated content. There is a huge amount of pressure on journalists to report quickly and still try to be thorough. And what happens is, A, they're trying to keep up with the audience attention span, but then also they don't have the time. They don't have the diligence. They don't have the resources to go through and have unbiased journalism or unbiased reporting because they're trying just to move too quick and don't have enough time to do fact-checking. In the past 10 years, our own newsroom staff within the Magic Valley, this includes television and print, those newsrooms have shrunk, if not by half, then more. And so the output of news media has not reduced. The number of hours that people air, our stations air, has not been reduced. But what has happened is they take canned, and that is quite literally the word that they use for it, they take canned content and air it. So they might take something from New Jersey about health benefits of eating oranges and air that. They have very little local reporting and are taking canned messages from the national media and airing those. So again, the speed in which the media are trying to keep up with consumers generates mistakes, biased journalism, and there's just a lot of pressure on mass media journalists. The other thing is that user-generated content has really changed the face of how we receive news, how quickly, how timely, and potentially how errors and mistakes are made. And I have a friend that calls this the speed of thumbs, basically because of texting and picture messaging. The picture that you see here of the U.S. Airways example in the Hudson River, this is when a plane landed in the Hudson River several years ago, was taken by somebody at a local park. And it hit news outlets and the World Wide Web faster than any other mass media generator could get to it. So a simple picture taken on a bank of a river was distributed very quickly, and U.S. Airways had no time whatsoever